Cheers and salutations. Welcome to Hard Lens Media. Shout out to our Can TV audience and shout out to everyone that's watching us on YouTube, Rumble, Rockfin, Odyssey, and Kick. We go live every Monday through Friday on our video platforms at 9 a.m. Central. So to our Can TV audience, when you watch our interviews, you can check out our full shows on our social media. So be sure to check out Hard Lens Media. Now, we are starting off today's show with something that's a little bit close to my heart. For those of you who may not know or perhaps need a reminder we did two documentaries a long time ago, one in 2018, the other in 2022, in regards for the fact that there is, contamination and pollution that's impacting Lake Michigan. And Chicago being a major metropolitan city, we rely on that water and we hope for it to be clean and safe. But there are other issues impacting Chicago's drinking water, such as the fact that we have antiquated lead pipes and other issues impacting the city's water supply. And as we all know, this is the 2024 election cycle. And while the presidential election cycle is front and center, and I know a lot of you, my viewing audience, are burnt out by electoral politics, I do encourage all of you to consider supporting citizen ballot initiatives, especially to my Chicago, Illinois audience, because we are a ballot initiative state, but also to look at offices at the lower level, stuff that maybe you might dismiss, but are fundamentally important to our security and safety and well-being, such as water reclamation. And as we all know, we need water to live. We need water to get by as much as we need it to be clean and safe. So joining me today is a candidate who's actually running for one of the many offices here for Cook County for water reclamation. And I think it's important that we give people who are running for these offices a platform, because anybody that can help do good and, more importantly, bring awareness to preserve and keep our water safe and clean should have their voices heard. We've interviewed previous candidates like this before in the past, and I want everyone to give a huge welcome. First time showing up on our show, Sharon Waller. Thank you so much for joining us here at Hard Lens Media. So, as we all know, water reclamation, pretty important, but can you at least explain more about the office, introduce yourself, who you are, and why we need to pay attention to this office in particular for this election cycle of 2024?
Happy to. And thanks for having me, Kit. I just really appreciate your platform for public discourse, because we have increasing suppression of political speech with our 501c3s, which is a whole nother topic that we can get into on another show. So if elected, I'll be the first ever water engineer on the Water Rec Board. That may be a little bit surprising to people. It's only been since 1890, and the Clean Water Act was 1972. But there literally has never been a water engineer on the Water Rec Board. What makes me different from the other candidates is that all water is my business. Mm-hmm. So we kind of arbitrarily, for management purposes, divide water up in wastewater, stormwater, and drinking water. Because I'm a water engineer, I deal with the entire water cycle, which is, by the way, one water. So even though we have different jurisdictions and we try to parse it up into sections, you really need to remember that it is just one water. And I believe that we would come to better management solutions if we viewed our problems through the lens of the water cycle, in the context of the water cycle.
Okay, now here's the thing. My audience is going to be asking this question. Why is it that there aren't water engineers, people who are professionals in that? What kind of people are right now running or at least that perhaps been maintaining that office of water reclamation if it's not their business in the first place? What exactly is going on here? Because that's a huge red flag for me, knowing that no water engineers are there. I think that's like number one job priority if you want to know what you're talking about, of course, because I know nothing and I don't see why I would want to be part of water reclamation if it's not part of my profile or business or study. What exactly is going on?
Well, I don't want to say that none of the engineers know about water, because that's definitely not true. We have somebody who was part of the Obama administration, the Great Lakes Water Czar, on the board. We also have a PhD chemist on the board, but that's kind of where the expertise on water stops. In the past, we had a highly respected environmentalist, but you can imagine that engineers are not trained in public speaking. So the election of the water commissioner is the reason that we elect is because of no taxation without representation. So you can imagine that people with more like organizing skills or a relationship with an established politician that they might have an advantage. But more than that, this office has been used for patronage. So for those that do the bidding of the Cook County Democratic Party, this office is given as a gift.
I see. So it's atypical Chicago politics. I encourage my audience, if you haven't read the book, either Chicago's Not Broke or American Pharaoh, please do so. There's plenty of other books to read, especially about the long sad history of Chicago politics in Cook County. But that's again a story for another day. But now let's switch things up here. And this is something that I think we need to hear more about. Can you explain to at least my Chicago audience, and yes, to a great extent to the rest of my audience as well, what exactly is happening with our aquifer? Is it potentially collapsing? What exactly is going on here? Because as you all, as I've mentioned earlier, we have a lot of contaminants, pollutants impacting Lake Michigan. We have lead pipes in which Chicago residents are drinking from, which is not safe at all. And now there's this talk of a collapsing aquifer. What's going on exactly? Can you elaborate more on that?
So City of Chicago and an increasingly far-reaching suburbs, including DuPage County, source their drinking water from Lake Michigan.
Okay.
Back in the 90s, we had a big movement with the state remediation program to outlaw the use of groundwater in Cook County because it was contaminated and it was easier to just outlaw it than to clean it up. That's perhaps an unfortunate way of viewing things, especially now that the aquifer next door to Cook County, and it actually even encroaches a little bit on Cook County on the western side, is collapsing. The St. Peter Sandstone Aquifer is a major aquifer in Illinois, serving Will County and Kane County. And the people on that aquifer and the businesses have to figure out an alternative water supply. So I participated in the Joliet public comment for their alternative water evaluation. So they are now hooking up to City of Chicago. And our state government denied them the opportunity to consider the Des Plaines River, which borders their public hall. And you have to cross that river to get to the public meetings. Because they said it is equivalent to the raw sewage coming from the Chicago combined sewer overflows. So I immediately got on the phone with those regulators and tried to understand their philosophy. And I basically just concluded and told them in that call that this is not helpful. You cannot be outlawing all the water downstream of Chicago during climate change because all options need to be on the table. So there is a sentence in our source water code that says no regular recycling of treated wastewater effluent. This is the only clause in the United States of America like this, and it effectively outlaws the natural water cycle that we teach in our third grade science curriculum. So this is a bit ridiculous. It's like trying to outlaw rain. Right. So it's just not happening. So there's plenty of reuse already going on. There's hundreds of discharge pipes into Lake Michigan. That is reuse. So it turns out that I have 3 professional organizations. So I'm stirring the pot, not only on politics, but with my professional organizations as well. And it turns out that the Mississippi River Basin, we are just the laggers on water reuse policy. The whole rest of the nation has water reuse rules.
Okay.
So we can learn from them. We don't even need to spend taxpayer dollars to make the rules. We can just adopt rules from like Colorado and maybe, read through them with our professionals and make a few changes. And our state government doesn't have to spend the 5 years and 5 staff that Colorado did to create those rules.
So let's say in a potential scenario in which you win this key seat, what can you do to specifically, I guess, raise the alarm or the issue within the state of Illinois? Obviously, you have to go through the legal process with the Illinois House of Representatives, the Illinois Senate, of course, and of course, eventually getting to the governor, but then you also take into account the city of Chicago, because many Chicagoans may not be aware of this. So what can be done effectively to at least get this kind of legislation going forward so that, we're at least able to function properly? Because in this day and age where water might eventually be worth more than oil, heaven forbid we ever get to that scenario. That's a doomsday scenario, but where water is gold, but it might as well treat it like it is. What can we do? What can you do specifically to really raise the issue?
Well, this is where I think I want you to remember that engineers are useful, and this is why they're useful in politics. I ran in 2022 with a total grassroots campaign, 75 volunteers. By the time I got on the ballot, after being challenged and everything else, I literally only had $1,000 for marketing. 200 of that went to Facebook ads, and 700 went to canvassing, and I got 150,000 votes. And this is like rocking the established political Cook County Democratic Party, because they don't understand. And frankly, I don't really understand how I got 150,000 votes, other than this message must be resonating. So, okay. But the real progress, I didn't win in 2022, but the real progress for me was what happened afterwards. Immediately after I rolled off the election, we got 3 bills in the House of Representatives. We now have 2 task forces on water reuse. We have a state water plan with recommendations for water reuse. We've got the first ever inaugural water reuse conference happening in Kane County in May. And on this conference, we're going to be talking with other states in the Mississippi River Basin. Basically super basic, like what is the definition of reuse? Do you acknowledge that there's 100 discharges, more than 100 discharges in Lake Michigan? And what is that called? Is that called return, which is the language of the Great Lakes Compact? Or can we agree with the other states, the other like 50, 30 states in the United States that call it reuse? And does it matter if we even come to that same language, or because Wisconsin is doing it? So they have the Waukesha project. They were running out of groundwater. So they are hooking up to Milwaukee, and then they treat that water and they return it to the Root River, which flows back to Lake Michigan. That is the drinking water source. That is a full cycle. So that is reuse, but they can't call it reuse because they don't have rules either, but at least they don't have a prohibition. So they call it return. And they're going to help us try to figure this out in May. So
okay, fantastic. Fantastic. Now, one thing I do want to bring up as well, and this is what we talked before we went live. I mentioned that we've done 2 documentaries in the state of Indiana in regards towards regulated, quote unquote, regulated waste. Dilution is the solution. But, we need to talk about these forever chemicals and their long lasting impact in the environment and what it does to our food. So what exactly are forever chemicals? I mean, can you explain a little bit what they are and the danger that they do pose, and what we can do to mitigate or at least stop as much as the risk of being exposed to this stuff as possible?
All right. So thanks for caring about this issue, because this is a great example of waste of taxpayer dollars. So forever chemicals have been, added to our environment for decades. The biggest example is nonstick coatings on your cookware. So the DuPont's Teflon. Right. It's also used in a lot of firefighting foams. It was just one of those great chemicals that got introduced into a lot of different manufacturing processes. So in order to not bring down our economy, we're going to have to do some kind of a phased approach to deal with the forever chemicals, to allow our industry to replace those chemicals in their manufacturing process without having to shut down. And Maine is doing that. So you and I and anybody listening can take that Maine legislation to your state rep and senator and say, I want you to write a bill on this. And this is literally what I did in order to get the legislation in the House for the water reuse, to repeal the prohibition on water reuse and authorized rulemaking. I called up Arizona DEQ, the Department of Environmental Quality, which they previously had a prohibition on reuse. And I talked to their lawyers and I just said, give me the basic. Turns out 2 sentences, repeal the prohibition and authorized rulemaking. I took those 2 sentences and shopped them around to state reps and senators, and we got bills. So there's other things that we can do for lead service lines. You can do the same thing. Guess who's against lead service line disclosure at property transfer?
Can you elaborate?
When you sell your property, you have to disclose if you have radon in your basement or if you have asbestos anywhere. And that is your home inspection. But you do not have to disclose whether you have a lead service line. So if we were to add that to disclosure at property transfer, we could get lead service line done, number one, it would really boost public education, and it would provide a financial incentive to work with the state. Like, the state has money, right? We have federal money now to replace these lead service lines. But if we don't do it in a timely and efficient manner, we're not going to get a second chance. That money is going to be gone, and we're never going to get it again. So we need to move on that, but everything requires public education. So there's a particular group that's against lead service line disclosure.
Oh, okay. So that's not cash money. Obviously, people don't want to. The last thing I want to do is be exposed to lead. But I guess, hey, all of us Chicagoans might as well get used to it, because we've been exposed to it for decades now. So hey, maybe that explains a lot about Chicago. But nonetheless, one thing I do ask for all the people who are at least running for office, have their team at least send me information about what they're running on, the issues at hand. And one thing that also caught my eye was this thing, and maybe you could explain a little bit more about it. Toxic algae. What is that, and why is that a concern for a lot of us here, in at least those who drink water? Like, how did toxic algae become an issue? What led to that, and how can we stop it? Can you please explain that to my audience?
Yes, so it's nutrient pollution. Nutrients are phosphorus and nitrogen. So that's fertilizer. We have fertilizer, these nutrients coming from our domestic wastewater, and we also have it coming from agricultural runoff. So the nice thing about having a water engineer run is that I have access to best practices nationwide or even globally. So I can point to best practice. So Wisconsin Green Bay is doing a fabulous job. Their Reclamation district has worked with farmers and also the Oneida Nation to install agricultural buffer strips on a pilot scale. And that was so successful that they expanded it watershed wide. So this is something that we should be doing. This doesn't necessarily require legislation, but it does require incentives and policy.
Okay. So that obviously that's something I've never heard of before. But now one other thing I do want to bring up, and that is when it comes down to at least dealing with some of the long-lasting issues, because there is the outer state issues, such as, industrial waste from Indiana, for example, where they're more laissez-faire in regards to regulations, or other outlying states. But will there be any kind of attempt by your office to at least hold some accountability? Because every time and this happens every summer or so, every spring, but there's always a report from either local Indiana state news or here from Illinois about a toxic waste spill that's happening in either Indiana or in a neighboring state going into Lake Michigan. And that's going to cause, obviously, some huge alarms. Some people, no one wants to be exposed to these dangerous chemicals. And due to the fact that we have covered this story over and over again, we did 2 documentaries. I mean, after everything I've learned, I'm not going to take a dip into Lake Michigan anytime soon. But will your office be able to at least push the issue of, hey, we need to put some regulations in these other states that are more laissez-faire, because there's always going to be some toxic spillage or some sort of disaster happening? And it seems like we are just playing with fate, to where one day we have a huge disaster and Lake Michigan is deemed untouchable, which is a scenario I don't want to see ever happen.
Yeah, so water reuse, that natural water cycle that's illegal in the state of Illinois, is this kind of master issue. So and reuse is very there's many flavors of it. There's industrial reuse, there's irrigation reuse, domestic reuse, potable reuse. So if we had incentives for water reuse, especially industry. So right now, industry is not reusing water in the Mississippi River or in the Great Lakes Basin, mostly because of economics. So when they seek it out, and I'm not here to blame and shame industry, because sometimes they are faster at responding to green initiatives than our government. Our government is by far the slowest, because we have to start from the grassroots education and then ask those grassroots educated people to demand better from their elected representatives. So if we are successful in passing the current bill in which is now in the Senate, which might actually pass by the 15th of March, then we are to the starting line. So what also needs to happen is we need to have a state chapter of a water reuse association to help push these initiatives. And then that state chapter needs to work with other states in the Mississippi River Basin. So Illinois is a little bit laggard right now. We could totally learn from Wisconsin. We can learn from Wisconsin both on harmful algal blooms, which I'm not sure I really demonstrated why that's such a thing, but if your dog like goes swimming in a toxic algae bloom, that could threaten their life. It's a much bigger thing on Lake Erie, but it is a big thing. It is an issue on rivers in Illinois. So not necessarily on Lake Michigan yet. So.
Okay. All right. So obviously there's a lot more to discuss, especially in regards towards protecting our water sources and ensuring that communities are safe, we're not exposed to dangerous chemicals. And I do encourage my audience, while a lot of us are burnt out by electoral politics, which is understandable, I get it, I am too, but there are other key offices that you can support and vote for, or either that support citizen ballot initiatives, because I think right now, while everyone's focused on the office for president, which is an important office, key election cycle, a lot of stuff to talk about, there are other offices that are up for election, things that we need to educate ourselves about, especially not only here in Illinois, but I encourage that for all of my audience members across the country, so that you are more aware of what's happening in your backyard. But as a final note, where can people follow you online and social media? Are there any events you want to give a promo for before we continue on with the rest of our main show?
Well, there's two things that I, as a grassroots candidate, yes, that's my website, and we have a countdown. So it is 7 days to voting in your early voting sites with the township and wards. I am asking for help from grassroots organizations for two things. Number one is easy: tell two friends to tell two friends, because we are completely relying on word of mouth. I wish for election finance reform. And I guess I'm kind of living it, because of those 150,000 votes in 2022 with such a measly little budget. But we really need help at the early voting polls too. There are 80 early voting polls open from March 4th to the 18th, and then it goes to the precincts. And those precincts are going to be 80 entities, jurisdictions times maybe about 30. And that feels completely overwhelming. So when you pass those people handing out literature, a grassroots candidate just can't cover that kind of volume. But we could make a dent in this early voting phase by having people canvass. So if you want to canvass, if you are willing to stand out for a couple hours at one of your early voting spots, please email me at wallerno4water@gmail.com, or I'll give you my phone number and you can text me 773-860-7588. I'm on social media at wallerno4water.com and on social media everywhere at wallerno4water.com. All right. We are trying to put together some kind of a social media advertising platform, and we just need something that's going to be snappy, because people aren't going to listen to an ad for 30 minutes as this extended format allows. So it has to be, quick. First ever water engineer on the Water Rec board, first candidate on the ballot. Waller for Water is a great ballot name. And I would love to unpack more, but that's not the format of those 30-second kind of infomercials.
All right. Well, that's a fantastic note to end it on. I do wish you all the best of luck to your campaign. And as always, folks, listen, I understand we're burnt out by electoral politics. I get it. But it's always important to find out what other offices are up, because at the local level, at the state level, you can make more of an impact, because that's where it matters, especially at the local and state level. So we can actually have, safety, enjoy clean drinking water and so much more, because after all, folks, we all use water, and we at least want to make sure that we're not drinking some dangerous toxic waste. So as always, thank you so much for joining our show. I encourage the rest of my audience to hold on. We're going to take a quick little break as we continue on the rest of our main show. To our CAN TV audience, if you want to learn more about Hard Lens Media, check us out on YouTube, Rumble, Rockman, Odyssey, and Kick. Thank you so much, Sharon Waller, for joining us. We're going to take a short little break and start with the rest of our main show.
Thank you, Kit.
Radio station just censored the word devil. Clearly, we are on a different level. I guess you wouldn't notice all the rolling boulders crashing past your shoulders when you're taught to shift your focus lower, scream at all the pebbles. cheering on the bombers because you can't abide the rebels. But I bet you'll wring your bloody hands when all the dust has settled, when the last little limb is pulled from Gaza's twisted metal. Then you can say how you were led astray, and never once in all your days would you have knowingly supported all the genocide for which you clapped and prayed. But they baited you with unconfirmed blurbs about babies until you were filled with rage. Yet someone told you babies had been starving, bombed, and caged for nearly 80 years in Gaza, and you looked the other way. So regret, but make it fashion. Go and pluck that final petal off a hyacinth on Instagram for every kid they kettled. Every son that Israel imprisoned when they're little, that they tortured for a decade, then surprised with their acquittal. And when they got released and saw their parents, and whenever siblings hadn't met the missiles, they stared right through their middle. Their eyes don't seem to focus, and their words are all but dribble, like they're pondering the darkest riddle. That is, how many false flags does it take to make humanity inhuman and uncivil, distorted by the revel? The crooked slant where Israel contorts into America, Biden bathing Bibi in a bloodbath in the bevel. I opened up my feed, and I saw children disassembled. Turned some music on and heard the station censor devil. Imagine thinking Doja Cat's a threat to moral fabric in the single largest terror cell that ever felled a temple, that ever sparked a cleansing, that ever burned a market, that ever raped with bayonets or carpet-bombed apartments, that ever turned your water off and left you in the darkness, left you doing surgery on children while they're conscious. You sing the devil's praises every time you sing our anthem. You sing a hymn to him that watched us birth a million phantoms. You'll proudly wave his flag, and yet you will not name the devil? Well, clearly, we are on a different level. I can give you names, shit, I'll give you several. They say the devil wears a different face for every general, like a composite of the char he brought to fields of emerald, and the wail of every childhood we made ephemeral. So who else has left the stain of blood on everything they touch? Who else can starve civilians and they don't so much as blush? Who else has paid for Gaza being flattened into dust? If there's ever been a devil on this earth, then it is us. That's U.S. What an ugly couple letters. Feeding shit and ignorance to those it chose to tether. From the river to the sea, both are slowly growing redder. For the devil that you know just knows you better. It knows every gut reaction it could ever make you feel. It knows fear is that which wakes you up and gets you on your wheel. It knows just the kind of story that will justify its war. And the scripts are wrapped for World War IV. So just imagine my surprise to give the radio a listen and to hear such pious morals out of Zionists and Christians that they'd take the devil's name and try to clip it from existence while they carry out his bloody business. You would wave a fascist flag, and yet you honor not your Iblis? Name you not Apollyon? Hush you now your witness? Bleed the name of Belial till tongue is rolling listless in the man-made mouth of Mammon, as Lamia's whispers listen. When carts are wheeling bodies through the cities that we crushed, and the very air is rotten with decay of all that was, who else would censor devil yet behave as Legion does? If there's ever been a devil on this earth, then it is us. U.S., but not a unity of souls. More a mass of corporations turning houses into holes, turning people into puppets, turning puppets into mold, turning mold into nutrition bars worth their weight in gold because they're bombing every bakery and burning every field with phosphorus that never once has wanted for a meal. The devil wears a mask and it delights in the reveal, in that moment where the face is let to peel. We do not love the underdog. We do not cheer the rebels. We lust for all their blood until the dust has finally settled. Then pity just ourselves that we were so misled to revel. Proudly wave his flag, and yet we will not name the devil.